So let's start off with you, Douglas, and talk. You, in your notes for this, were saying that we should be slightly cynical about big data. Lots of people talk about it. This is the way that we are going to make leaps forward in terms of companies dealing with their customers and so on, and managing the economy. What are the cautionary notes that you'd like to make about that?
So there's a general rule that anytime that you see something in the press with capital letters enclosed in quotes, you know it's a fad and probably real. And the minute, probably fake, excuse me, the minute you see that, you should short any company which has in its marketing material that phrase. Okay, my company does not have that phrase in its tagline, although we do it. So audience participation, how many of you have heard the story that Target knows you're pregnant before you do? How many of you know that it's false? That example was made up. It's so incredibly compelling, though. How many of you know that example was first used more than 12 years ago talking about Oracle databases? And it won't die. Big data is not about doing the same kind of stuff with a whole bunch of more exemplars. Big data is about recognizing the fact that storage is free and infinite, and computation is free and infinite, and doing different kinds of stuff with new stuff that you're able to find. I'm cynical because most people are using it to mean database. That's not what it means. It means math.
Okay, that's a good thought. There was show my age here, but there's a song called by the Police called Too Much Information, which was running around in the 1980s. In the financial markets, David, we've got people trading every millisecond, a host of financial bits of data, of economic information coming out all the time. Is that very useful to you, or is it just overwhelming and it's hard to sort out the wheat from the chaff?
Well, the world of investment management has, from the beginning of time, been about gathering information and organizing that information in a way that you can make an investment decision. Nothing has changed in that regard. And if you go back 100 years ago, there wasn't really a very complicated world. Globalization hadn't occurred yet. There were a small number of companies that controlled most of the global economic activity. It was much easier for an investment manager to think about where to allocate capital. As the world has grown in complexity, and even more importantly, as the rate of change driven by innovation in the world has increased rather dramatically in our generation, there is vastly more information that any investment manager should consider in making an investment decision. And in addition, these decisions have to be updated much more quickly as the world is changing. The challenge, I think, facing the investment world is that the human mind has not become any better than it was 100 years ago. And it's very hard if someone is using traditional methods to juggle all of the information about the global economy in their head to make a decision about maybe is Apple a good or a bad investment today. And so the benefit of having algorithmic techniques, and I couldn't agree with you more, it's not about the databases, it's about the algorithms. And in fact, my background is in artificial intelligence. I mean, I really think of this as an AI business, not a database business. And I think that ultimately you can think of all the data being available for investment decisions that in a very simple-minded way, which is every little bit of information should help you make your investment decision a little bit better, but only a little bit. But if you find a way to collect it all and combine it all, then you can make a decision that's a lot better.
Just to come back to you on that, I know there's various behavioral finance studies which have found that the more information they have, people are more confident about the decision they make, and the more confident they are, the worse their decision turns out to be. So is there a problem you have the illusion of knowledge in that you have 1,000 data points about the US economy, whereas 20 years ago you had 100, but those 1,000 data points still don't capture the dynamic vicissitudes of US economic?
I think that, in the end, there are, and again, it's a math problem, as you said, and you have to formulate your big data analysis in a way that you can understand whether or not you're essentially, in putting in more technical words, overfitting the data, or actually extracting legitimate information out of the data. that actually is what the business is all about.
So if I may just
yes,
pile on there. So when Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky first started writing what ultimately became behavioral economics, one of the very early papers has this too much data fact in it. But what that paper talks about is not inherently there's too much data, but you take all the data and you're increasingly convinced. So anything which doesn't fit your model, you chunk out. One of the nice things about the math that we're talking about is you can have 1,000 data points. Each one adds a little tiny bit, and so when one is wrong or one is missing, which is the state of play in economics, investing, and underwriting, the math is able to handle it more effectively. We don't toss data out because we don't believe it. The math doesn't care.
Right.
So we're actually a little bit immune to exactly what Danny was talking about.
Okay, though I think I might come back to you about that later. But Greg, I wanted to talk to you about insurance. I mean, you can view insurance as the original big data industry, right? Studying the lifespans of people in the 16th, 17th century, judging, therefore, what kind of annuity rates you can pay, what kind of life insurance. So you obviously can listen to Douglas be cynical about it, but in practical terms, is the ability that you have to get more data, to apply more complex maths to it, is that proving useful?
Yeah, so if insurance started, I guess insurance should have it all right, correct? Insurance is perfect on big data. Just where you all go to for the bastion of insight over insurance, I'm sure. We don't really think of it as insurance at all. In fact, just background on Aon, we're 67,000 colleagues networked around the world. To the extent we can help make better decisions on behalf of our clients, we win and they win, period. By the way, it isn't just risk, it's risk, retirement, and health. So we touch more companies every day on the topic of risks than anyone in the world. We are about 20% of the retirement pension market we touch, and we administer more health benefits than anyone in the world. We have a view that candidly, data and analytics is the best way to change behavior in those three platforms to drive economics and good outcomes. And in fact, we've probably made the biggest bets in the history of our industry on these three categories. We do have a view, though, I do agree with with David and Douglas here. Big data, misdirected, is a complete fool's errand. In many respects, you can imagine an industry which has just gathered tons of data. If there's not an outcome and you're not changing behavior at the client level that changes a company's performance, what are you doing? And for us, our view is take risk. If we can actually help match capital with risk need more effectively, our clients win. By the way, the economics of that, the leverage of that are huge. But if we can't specifically call out things like improvements in operating performance, changes in financial strength, or reductions in volatility, what are we doing? So we would highlight, humbly, with our 65, 70,000 colleagues, that the connection between data and outcome is critical. And if you're not using the algorithms to continue to get that better, what are you doing? And for us, we think that's an industry level bet. We think that will actually transform risk. It will transform retirement. It will transform health. And if in the US, by the way, take health for a minute, if you think about changing individual behaviors with new insight, if we don't do that, we can't solve the health cost problem. If you don't do that, you can't solve the retirement problem globally, which, by the way, is acute in every country in the world, and you certainly can't solve the risk issue. Try to solve cyber without better insight. It's not going to happen.
But let's pursue, there's a couple of themes of insurance, I think, that apply to almost everything one does. One is sort of selection bias is the first one. So the Spanish government was one of the first to sell annuities in the 16th century to try and deal with its financial problems. And what the Spanish monarchs failed to notice was that a lot of annuities were bought by parents for their 15-year-old daughters, and there was no adjustment for age in the annuity rates the Spanish government paid out. So it was a terrible lost leader for them. One of the reasons they went bust so many times. From your point of view, does the difficulty in analysing data, is selection bias the real problem? So people who will live longer buy fixed annuities, people who will who know that they have a disease will buy term insurance and so on.
It's really, I would say, more than that from the standpoint. Let's just take risk as an example. I mean, for us, we happen to place more risk than anybody in the world. What does that do for us on behalf of our clients? Not a lot. We actually had to capture the information. Capturing the information in the insurance world is a mess. We started an innovation center in Singapore and in Dublin. We have PhD statisticians who are literally taking data and scrubbing it for the first time ever. Because of that, we've got a database, the biggest in the world, for whatever that's worth, nothing yet, from the standpoint of outcomes. that literally helps us understand literally how premium flows work around the world on a real-time basis. That insight truly helps us match capital, all the balance sheets out there, there's roughly $2.5 trillion of balance sheets, with client need. That, to us, that gives us an ecosystem view that no one else has. That's what helps us change behaviors at the client level. And whether it's an annuity call or whether it is, do you want to write terrorism insurance on this part of the world, or do you want to create cyber, right? How are you going to actually create and cover the cyber for Google? Who's going to think about that? How's one going to come up with that?
We thought really hard about it.
And Google didn't buy it, by the way. Google doesn't have it because they literally don't think there's a value for it. Because the balance sheets haven't figured out how to actually provide the coverage in a way that you would afford it. That's where we come in. And so in the end, we're a great big distribution machine trying to understand capital and need. And our view is data and analytics and the understanding of that ecosystem is literally the fundamental, it's the determinant which will change behavior. And that's why in the end, we're investing so much time in it. And I will tell you, getting the data, because it's garbage in, garbage out, you got to get the right algorithms, you got to do the right turns on those. But candidly, in our world, getting the right data is absolutely critical, and scrubbing the right, makes sure you've got something that's actually, you can actually look at in an effective way is one of the most difficult challenges.
I'm going to come back about the right data in a minute, but Douglas, maybe on selection bias, obviously trying to target the unbanked. When we were talking beforehand, you were talking about kind of subprime borrowers, and that very word sounds off alarm bells. How do you sort out the people who genuinely need and might even pay you back from the people who are gaming you to try and exploit you?
So the word subprime scares people a lot, but it scares people kind of for bad reasons, because they hear the word subprime and what they think of is mortgages that are zero-doc mortgages, or kind of structures where clearly the incentives are all awry. With one of the products that we offer called ZestCash, it's a very small dollar high cost loan for people to use in emergencies. These people aren't buying flat screen TVs, they're paying for heart medications that aren't covered under the US insurance system, sports. They're paying for car maintenance. They're trying to survive having no safety net. And the way that historically they've been underwritten is that more or less they'd go to a place called a payday loan store, and if they have a heartbeat, they'd get a loan, and that loan is just ridiculously highly priced. We do something quite different. There's a lot of information about everyone in the world in relatively easy to find places. So we go out and we gather about 10,000 pieces of information about every applicant. We expand it into about 100,000 signals. We run 10 independent artificial intelligence models against that, and then we combine them all into a final score. And the purpose of all of this data is that when you're in the subprime space, a lot of data about each applicant is missing. It's just not there, or it's incorrect. For example, 10% of ZestCash customers show up on their primary credit bureau as being dead. They are not, in fact, dead. We call them zombie borrowers, as you would. But when you have 100,000 signals, the fact that 10,000 of them are wrong, you kind of don't care about. That process from gathering the data all the way through the final answer takes about 3 seconds. And the nature of all that nonsense is that even though we can't scrub the data because the data isn't ours, and we have to be able to be resilient to the problem that we're all talking about, which is the data is often garbage.
Well, that spurs the thought that I was going to ask Greg in a minute, but have you found, obviously people look at income, job status, all that. Have you found some piece of data that is actually a very good predictor of whether people are likely to pay you back that people didn't look at before?
Sure. One of the I'm going to come around to the answer. The first problem that people often have with big data is that just because something is statistically significant does not mean it's important. And given enough cases, every possible hypothetical relationship will exist and will be statistically significant. So you actually got to pay attention to it. So undoubtedly there are thousands of relationships which are there significantly, which aren't real, but some kind of funny ones. If you go and you ask somebody, what's the most important thing in making a loan? This gentleman who wishes he was not sitting in the front.
He's one of ours, so you're fine.
Oh, yeah.
He's the US business editor.
So the Economist would say the most important thing in making a loan is income. It turns out that when you actually make loans, with the special case of income being greater than 0, income does not predict default at all. And then I go back to the Economist. He says, no, I didn't mean income. I meant income minus expenses. I meant available income. Oh, I get it, income minus expenses. With the special case of income minus expenses being greater than 0, it does not predict default. However, if you take income minus expenses and then you parcel it out by the city in which this person lives. Okay? So if you have income minus expenses of 15% and you live in Manhattan, well, Manhattan's expensive. If you have income minus expenses of 15% and you live in Kansas City, you're spending too much money. You're a wastrel. You should loan to the New Yorker. You should not loan to the Kansas City person. The beauty of having all these signals is you can find all these weird, subtle interactions that make sense once you know them, but you would not have thought of in advance.
I'm sure you can spend a lot of money in Kansas City. Greg.
By the way, it's a nice town. For those of you who haven't been there, if there's anyone from Kansas City, I didn't mean to insult you.
Greg, the reason I was thinking about that was that an insurance company told me that there's an optimal distance you can be from the road if you want to avoid being burgled. So if your front window's right on the street, you're going to be opportunistically burgled. If you're 100 feet away from the street, then people can't see you come in and there's good cover from... do you find that kind of thing?
So I would say two things. One, first, this is back to does insight, as Douglas is describing, data analytics, however you want to describe it, does it help you make better decisions? The answer is undeniably yes, for a lot of straightforward reasons and a lot of things that you discover along the way. And Douglas has highlighted a number of things that happened in the underbanked world. By the way, there will be tremendous insight there. There is absolutely, I can't begin to describe across what we're seeing. I mean, we literally have a database of 2.2 million trades and 120 billion of float premium. The pattern recognition you pick up in that is unbelievable. By the way, you can look literally how you want to underwrite if you want to talk about homeowners insurance, that's what you're describing, or auto insurance, or by the way, we actually serve mostly commercial companies, so satellite data on crops, literally in Australia, to understand literally where they are in their state of play, undernourished, overnourished, underhydrated, overhydrated, and the implications on how you do risk management against it. Now extrapolate that times 1,000. So the insight is incredibly important. That's why we believe fundamentally, and I would argue that the insurance industry, God love us, is way behind. But ironically, data and analytics in insurance is very powerful. You make a mistake on a loan, you lose the principal. You make a mistake on underwriting insurance, you lose a multiple of that. So the leverage on insight is actually quite high. But I would make one other point, and just want to get the panelist's reaction to this too. It isn't just about the content and the insight. In the case of Aon, we have 65,000 colleagues. The organizational change, the leadership change, when you've got distributed application of capital against distributed need called risk, means we actually have to have 65,000 colleagues or some portion of that to actually understand and will operationalize and do something different. And in the end, if our clients don't change behavior as a result of this, we have a lot of investment in big data, a lot of cool analyses and a lot of cool charts, and action doesn't change that drives economic performance. So I would just highlight it is unbelievable opportunities as you're describing, but it requires the refinement of that from an analytics standpoint, but it also a lot of organizational, a dose of organizational change in the context of this too.
Well, when I think, so when I think about, going back to the opening comments about, I quibble with the big data theme completely, and to me it really is an AI algorithm revolution, and what the real question in my mind is, what are the limits of computers today, and what will they be capable of doing in our generation in the next 10 years? And the data is only part of it. And what I think is actually extremely interesting and also very potentially scary for many is that computers armed with data and great algorithms appear to be capable of doing just about anything. They can drive cars better than most drivers already. It's a brand new technology. They can fly airplanes more safely than virtually any pilot can. They can make investment decisions at 2 sigma. We manage about 25 billion in assets, in equities, futures, and FX around the world. The investment decisions are entirely made by AI-driven algorithms. And I believe that we're already approaching the point where in the game of chess, no human chess player can beat a computer. In the game of investment management, I don't know. I mean, eventually the time will come that no human investment manager will be able to beat the computers. And in insurance and in a whole range of other fields, I think we need to be prepared to hand over a lot of the complex decision-making to algorithms.
But I want, yeah, let me come back to that. That was what I was just about to ask you, whether that's the right analogy, because you've got chess in which the number of legal moves is obviously infinite, but there's a set range of moves which each piece can make.
It's not the right
analogy. In the
analogy.
financial markets, you've got the Knightian uncertainty problem. You don't know the distribution of outcomes.
But neither do humans.
No, of course. No.
So the point to your point is exactly, usually the pushbacks about why computers might not be able to handle this situation, you then just ask the question again, well, why would humans be able to handle it either? So that's very true.
But, well, it's on fitting again. So there was, you will be well aware of it, the sell-off in markets in August 2007, which was called the quant. Was it called the quant crash? It wasn't a flash crash, but it was a quant sell-off.
Yep.
And Cliff Asness, who's been at this conference before, Make You Are, wrote a paper about it. And basically, you fit your models of computer trading to the past data. The past data, analyze the models, come up with the best solution. But if there is a best solution, then all the different models tend to come up with the same solution.
Okay,
so then when the underlying correlations change for some reason, they all go wrong at the same time.
That's not what happened, though. The event you're referring to in 2007 was different. The quant meltdown, as some people refer to it, first of all, it was a certain set of algorithms that were involved, not all. And secondly, after the event was analyzed, it was caused by human action, not by the computers. It was human decisions to sell the portfolios. If left to the computers, that wouldn't have happened. So in the end, it was the humans that caused all the trouble, not the algorithms. And that is the bottom line on that one.
So okay. I think that's...
it's true.
I think one of the lessons that those of us who've been doing AI for 25 years have learned, actually, is that the cybernetics problem is quite challenging, which is to say, where almost all of our algorithms fail is either of the two following scenarios. One, the underpinning distribution of actions is unknown. Right? Not true in chess, not true in many domains, but always true. And second, where there are profound discontinuities in the response space. For example, self-driving cars. There's two different approaches you could use. You can make the roads smarter, which is what Toyota's approach has been, basically putting small magnets in every road. Or you can try and do what Google did after I left, which was trying to build a car itself which recognizes stuff. It's interesting, though, that car fails quite spectacularly if you go on to gravel roads. Right. It's not designed to run gravel roads. There aren't that many left, but still. It does that because suddenly the response space that the cameras are seeing have changed so spectacularly that it simply fails. And there's basically a bailout component that says, look, stop. The same thing is true in airplanes. Most modern airplanes, the automated flight controls as a whole can take the plane off, can level it out, and can even land it, although it's illegal to have landing AI in private planes. And yet almost no pilots, including the folks who are test pilots for the systems, ever use the takeoff and landing. And if you dig into why, they say, like, oh, it just happens that if we get a wind shear right here, it'll kick the automatic flight controls off, and I'll have to grab it anyway. But if my hands are on the wheel, I'm a little bit faster. There are things where humans are uniquely and to anyone's understanding, unreplaceably good at.
On the aircraft one, I don't agree. I think that the evidence and the data suggests that, in fact, in the cases when the flight control systems kick the decision back to the pilots more often than not crash the airplane. And the reason, and so
you should have stopped there. More often than not, make mistakes.
Well,
actually, crashes are
but
quite.
But the algorithms weren't given much of a chance to handle the situation. So again, my my response to that would be that yes, in fact, algorithms make mistakes, and so do humans. So it's not a question of can you develop the perfect algorithm that will handle all situations. The question is the algorithm going to be better than a typical human could handle? The world has a very large number of pilots, and the ability and quality of these pilots vary. I would think that the right answer is to design flight control systems that will handle all situations. It's a much longer debate. But and the key point to remember is that we're just at the beginning of this revolution. It's just starting. And so the limits that you're talking about in many cases are very real, but what's going to happen over the next 10 years is my question.
If you think, literally what you're seeing real time is how do you actually capture value in your business system from big data? And by the way, thoughtful argument back and forth on how one would think about it and how far you go. I think there was a Gartner article yesterday in the Journal, I think, that talked about what are people worried about in big data? Frankly, the best leaders in the world, would they say? How do we get value out of it? I mean, literally, what does it mean? And one of the big fears is we could all spend $1 gazillion. I'm sitting in a company, as I said, we actually have to report every quarter. We better make progress. We spend money on this. We better get a return. And at the end of the day, how do you get value and how much are you going to spend? Because we could all spend $1 gazillion to do this. What do we get out of it? And what you're seeing is a very, I think, very thoughtful debate on how to think about it. I would just put one other piece of complexity into this, which is why understanding how you derive value is so critical. Back to data and analytics and algorithms better translate into action. That action better drive performance or improvement or better decisions, however you want to describe it. At Aon, again, it's very specific. Operating performance, balance sheet strength, and volatility. If it doesn't improve that, what are we doing on behalf of our clients? The difficulty is flying an airplane is an individual. Making a trade is an individual. A lot of the business systems you all deal with every day, certainly one we deal with, is a whole set of individuals making decisions on one side and a whole set of individuals making decisions on the other side. So in the topic of risk management called cyber, you have thousands of risk managers and CEOs trying to decide what to do about cyber and thousands of balance sheets called insurance companies trying to decide how to help them. In order to actually make the system better, they have to make better decisions. So you're literally not only having better analytics and insight, you better actually change human behavior. That's the whole behavioral piece that sort of comes into this beyond just data and analytics. And so I just would, as you think about the benefit you might derive from this, it is like, what are the lessons you can draw on how to change your business system? Some are more simple than others. Although the ones that actually have a greater probability for short-term true impact is making a decision in the underbanked world. There's an algorithm that's been developed. A decision comes out of that. You don't have 1,000 people doing that. The algorithm makes that decision. A lot of what we do every day is much more distributed. And individuals have to change behaviors if there's going to be real outcome from that.
Can I, just a thought, I'm being told to go to questions in a minute, but I have two more thoughts to run past you before we do that. David, very quickly, we heard a lot about cybersecurity before the break. I can't see anybody hacking into Douglas's system, the Russians, to try and bring down the US economy.
I was responsible for security at Google. I have a...
Oh yeah, absolutely. But if all the cars on the road were governed by a particular program, if all the trades on the market were governed by programs, what's to stop some foreign power hacking in and causing complete chaos in a way that they can't persuade individual drivers among us on the streets to suddenly go wild?
At the moment they can't. Well, but they can shut down all the power in the United States, which I think would be bad enough already. So I agree with you that cybersecurity is an enormous concern. There's nothing stopping a terrorist today from implanting something in the flight control software of all Boeing jets and having it trigger some massive disaster. I mean, this is all the world we live in. And in fact, really, at the moment, I think it's one of the greatest risks that we face. I don't think that there is a good handle on this.
But is there not a concentration risk of millions of traders? But you won't have millions of programs. Well, the programs will hone themselves to focus on a few variants, won't they, just by the natural?
Well, I mean, I think that if you just imagine a world that all investment management is done by computer, which I think is reasonably likely to happen. Not all, but the vast majority is likely to happen. Today, it's already the majority of money, actually, if you consider various kinds of passive strategies and so forth. I think that doesn't mean that there'll be one or two programs. It's a lot of competition, and the algorithms are all very different. Okay. And so you're not going to just have one software package from Google or Microsoft that manages investments.
Unless Douglas wants to come back on that, I'm going to just go to the other big issues we haven't got to yet, which is the use of data and the privacy issues that involve in it. Insurance is another good example. Mm-hmm. Should you be allowed to genetically test people to see what kind of diseases they might have? How much data is it reasonable for companies to have? obviously be fantastic for all of you to know everything about everybody in this room, and your programs would work much better and your risk management would be better. But everybody in this room might not want that to happen. And how do you think the insurance industry is handling that issue?
It is absolutely an evolution. First of all, in the end, ultimately you better be making decisions which build trust and drive value. And if you can't ultimately do that, as the companies we serve, I will tell you, we talk to them about this issue all the time. And again, this is virtually, most of the largest companies in the world, medium-sized companies and small companies we serve around the world are all, how do we improve our business? But also, you can't improve business unless you have trust of your ultimate customers, of your clients. And so in the end, being able to have the conversation around this is why we need the information, this is why we can protect your information, and be a good custodian of that information and build trust in that. And by the way, we know it's as weak now as it's ever been. And by the way, it's going to get weaker because everyone in this room is going to get, if you're in a business, you're going to get, you will have already experienced cyber threat, period. If you think you haven't, you all have. The question is, how are you dealing with it? So I would say, Philip, for us, it's an evolution, but we try to balance what kind of insight and nourishment are we getting? What kind of value can we bring to the table? How can we protect your situation? And you got to build that equation effectively over time.
Douglas, I think you argue that privacy's dead.
Scott McNeely argued that privacy was dead 15 years ago. I'm not sure what he would say of the current situation. He might say the second half of his quote, which is get over it. The funny thing is, people say they care about privacy, but they don't actually. Show of hands, how many of you are carrying one of those cards for a grocery store? Oh, come on, you're all friggin' lying. 40% of the US population carries one. How many of you all have ever engaged in a loyalty program at Starbucks? Guilt group. More or less all of you. What you're all doing is selling your privacy, selling where you bought stuff, when you bought it, how you paid for it, what else you bought it with, and if you returned it, for a couple of cents in coupons. People will sell their privacy for almost nothing. I'm not actually sure anyone really does truly care about privacy. What they care about is, are you doing good for me as a vendor? And what I'm getting from you, either buying directly or buying indirectly, add value. If so, feel free to have my data. If not, no, you can't have my data, leave me alone.
That's exactly right.
We all had to sign away as speakers our rights to The Economist before we went on this panel. So,
not big risk
I
there.
expect to be photoshopped into some dreadful film.
It'll involve cats.
We've got a kind of, I've sensed on this panel, kind of very high IQ range here. So not a range, but a high average.
High average?
I'm the bottom of the range.
This is a
I'm on the bottom in case there's any question. I am here representing mediocrity.
So it's a good chance to ask some questions. So please feel free. I don't know what we do about questions in the other room, but I'm relying on my colleagues to solve that issue. Question? Yes. Oh, yes. Stan.
Hi. This one is for Douglas and anybody else who wants to interject. There are things that you're allowed to do in credit scoring, and there are things that you're not allowed to do in credit scoring, and there are things that are somewhat in a gray area, and the things that you're not allowed to do are racial proxies and racial discrimination and stuff like that, and there are a lot of things that could provide lift to a credit score, so give you a better idea if somebody's a good credit, but they end up being proxies for other things that you're not allowed to do. How do you get around this issue?
Yeah, so there are a set of laws that, for the record, I am not an attorney. Anything I say today you should not construe as advice. There are a set of things you have to track, notably around disparate impact, which is, are you failing to give loans to people for some sort of reason which we socially deem unacceptable, usually race, gender, in California, sexual preference, a set of things that, frankly, I think are all probably morally correct and maybe should be more. The tricky thing is, do you accidentally back into one? And so, like all lenders, we don't collect the data which is disparate impact because you just don't want to. But we do a bunch of analysis on the back end to try and see if these things together tend to look like that, et cetera. And there's information that we deliberately blur, so we add some error to the data to try and make sure we don't back into a few things. The hardest thing actually in the US regulatory system is adverse impact. So if Jenny applies for a loan with me and I say no to her, I have to give her a set of reasons why I said no. And the public policy goal of adverse impact was to tell Jenny that there's a piece of information in your credit bureau that's incorrect and you should go fix it. That's almost impossible to do with 100,000 signals. Like, what do I tell her? Turns out, actually, that all the current people who give adverse action are using a model which is actually relatively unrelated to the actual human who's being measured. So the reasons are maybe somewhat less than useful. And we actually have a way to give literally the reasons that mattered and the reasons. Furthermore, we can say, actually, these things look wrong to us. But it's really challenging to do that. So you end up in situations where the regulatory framework that we use has great public policy goals and great social impact goals, and maybe don't quite mesh exactly right with the math that we're doing.
Greg, do you want to come in on that? I mean,
I would just highlight, look, this example, by the way, great example on credit score, by the way, the evolution of credit score and our understanding behavioral sort of economics sort of for individual consumers has developed for a long period of time. It used to be very rudimentary, then it got refined, then we brought in regulation, then we created proxies and iteration after iteration, and I'm sure we have a better model here than we have anywhere out there. But in the world we live in, it's beyond the consumer. It's literally, it's the global economy. So we're serving companies. So in the context of sort of your question, sort of regulation, you sort of step back and go, what are the kinds of things you can do to understand insight around, again, behavior change that changes economics, or decisions you would make that would be different that change economics. And for us, it is an explosion, beyond just pure, do I make a credit decision on giving someone money or not? It is a whole series of things on, do I get cyber or not? Do I do terrorism or not? Do I do property or not? Do I, by the way, not do any of that stuff because I'm worried about my global volatility in my supply chain? Let's look at that. And so for us, the whole series of sort of data and analytics underpinning what happens in risk for us, monster. Bigger in health. Literally, we're all in the middle of the health game in the US. I will tell you, one part of the P&L for every single one of our clients, no matter how good they are, that's a disaster, is their health blind, where it says cost of healthcare. I made a promise to all my employees. I am actually not meeting that promise. They're upset with me. My P&L is a disaster, and by the way, it's going to get worse. On average, people becoming less healthy, per unit cost of healthcare is going up. If you don't do something to help change behavior in a way that they actually drive it, so back to Douglas's point around building trust, you're in trouble. And by the way, that's not a force problem. That's not like you better do this or else, because employers can't do that. Employers can kind of create the possibility, and employees can actually change behavior. The economics of that are massive. And so for us, the leverage around this, the insight that Douglas is talking about, David's talking about, we think is enormous. That's why we're betting on it.
Yeah, just to generalize your question, the technology innovation intersects with regulation all the time. And just a perfect example is Uber. And so many of the monopolistic protections that the taxi cab industry has had were designed for specific reasons. Before you had apps and the ability to collect information, and they wanted to protect passengers. They wanted to make sure that the drivers were vetted. There were no other way to do that. It all made perfect sense. But now perhaps there's a much better way to do it because of technological innovation. And I think that the world needs to be very open-minded about regulation and adjusting the regulation to permit innovation to continue.